The madman constantly took advantage of women that passed through the roundabout at night, and after a while he disappeared to become a very wealthy man, but it all ended in disaster. This roundabout was located at a very popular place in the central city of Onitsha, Anambra State. At this roundabout, life never really slows down. Buses bend noisily around the curve, traders shout over one another, and dust rises and settles like it has always belonged there. However, day after day, there was a young man named Cheeky, but everyone called him mad, not because anyone knew his story, but because it was easier to label him than to ask questions. His clothes were torn beyond repair, his hair was tangled and stiff with dirt, and his body, though slim, still carried the strength of youth, which made people pity him even more, because madness, they believed, had stolen a future that should have been bright. During the day, people treated him gently. Women passing by slowed their steps and dropped food beside him, sometimes rice wrapped in nylon, sometimes bread or sachets of water, and men tossed coins at his feet without stopping, not out of care exactly, but out of relief, as if kindness was a small fee paid to fate so it would never choose them next. He rarely spoke, rarely lifted his eyes, and he stayed there quietly until evening came, and then, just before the sun disappeared, he would stand up and walk away, disappearing into the flow of the city like he had never been there. At night, that same roundabout changed its character. The noise reduced, the streetlights danced instead of shining, and the gutters, swollen from the day's water, reflected broken pieces of light. People walked faster then, especially women, and phones were held tighter, bags clutched closer to the body, because fear lived more freely at night. It was during those hours that screams began to cut through the quiet, not every night, but often enough to settle unease in the chest. Sometimes people arrived in time to help, finding shaken women whom the madman had taken advantage of, with torn clothes and trembling hands, and sometimes all that was left behind was silence and the knowledge that someone would never pass that way again after dark. But the terrifying part was that he always flew at the speed of light, so no one saw him and traced such evil action to him, even when the victims boldly referred to him. Gradually, people began to notice the pattern, and suspicion settled on the very person they had pitied in daylight. He was always there by day, always gone at night, and yet the fear lived in the darkness he returned to. Men tried to chase him away, throwing stones, shouting threats, even swinging sticks, but he always returned, because during the day he was harmless, and at night he was untouchable, shielded by the excuse of madness, and the belief that someone with nothing to lose could not be reasoned with. One night, something happened that did not fade quietly. Amaka returned home long after midnight, went straight into the bathroom and stayed there until the water ran cold. She was another victim and was traumatized by what happened, but little did she know that the real shocker was on its way. 2 weeks after the incident, Amaka found out that she was pregnant, and after her calculations, it could only be for the madman. By the time she realized she was pregnant, the madman was gone, not chased away, not driven out, simply vanished. And just like that, the screams stopped and the city moved on, stepping over the memory like it always did. What nobody knew was that the madness had been a disguise, carefully worn and carefully maintained. The man had never been insane, not for a single day. He had gone to a ritualist, agreed to a 6-month ritual that demanded he would be mad for a while and treat women in the most disgusting and cruel way. But then, he was warned clearly that in all he did, he must never impregnate any of these women, because the consequence would follow him for life. According to the ritualist, if he ever got a woman pregnant during the ritual process, the seed of the pregnancy will be his child forever, and he won't be able to reproduce a child again. Now, the 6 months had ended, and he never knew that his last victim was already with a child. Although the money flowed immediately after the ritual, the ritualist revealed everything to him and reminded him of the consequences of his action. But he thought that since he was so wealthy that he could use money to sort everything out, and his options were to either get a surrogate to handle the childbearing or adopt a child. To him, those options were the perfect fit to cover up for every mistake he had made. But unfortunately for him, that option didn't work as he thought. After getting married, the absence of children felt normal until his wife started complaining because she was medically healthy. Doctors found no clear problem, surrogacy was attempted again and again and failed each time, and hope slowly turned into frustration and fear. Adoption seemed like a door finally opening, but on the very day a child was placed into his hands, something went wrong in a way no one could explain. The child became lifeless the instant he was placed in his arms. That was a shocking moment for Chike, and from that moment, his life collapsed inward, because tragedy does not always shout. Sometimes it simply arrives and refuses to leave. His wife began to sense that the house was filled with something evil, something that followed him quietly, and when she left, she did not accuse or argue, she only escaped, as if staying any longer would swallow her too. Alone, surrounded by wealth that could buy anything except peace, he began to hear things at night. Babies' cries that did not belong to any child in his home, sounds that pulled him out of sleep with his heart racing and his hands shaking. At the time when everything had gone wrong, he remembered the warning, and he returned to Onitsha, searching desperately for the woman whose face he could not remember, and whose life he had shattered without knowing her name. But she was no way to be found. He searched markets, hospitals, old streets, and records, but nothing led him to her, and each failed attempt made him lose his mind. And from losing his mind, the street that served as a tool for his ritual became his home. Chika roamed around every part of the road, and that particular roundabout in dirty and torn dress, carrying wraps of clothes in his arms and calling it baby. At this point, the money, status, legacy, and comfort he wanted was far-fetched, and he became entirely restless and mad for the rest of his life.